name's Borman, and I live here in Ecuador. I was born and raised here. My parents were with Wycliffe Bible translators, raised here amongst the Cofans. And so the Cofan people are here in Ecuador. They live in the northeastern jungles of Ecuador. They're a people group that is about 1,200 people to maybe 1,500, something like that, which has grown from the time when my parents first arrived here, because it was only estimated about 350 at that time. So it has been a growing community. You know, my parents coming here, that was the kind of basically the first time in a long time that they had heard anything about Jesus and about what Christ did for them. They came in, they didn't know a bit of the language. The Cofans had a little bit of Spanish. My dad had a little bit of Spanish, and it wasn't a written language, so they had to take that word and they'd write it down as phonetically, and they would do that over, you know, everything that they could find. And until they got up enough of the sounds, they figured they had pretty much all the sounds, and then they had to create an alphabet. And creating the alphabet, they wanted to make it as close to Spanish as possible, so that it would be easy for somebody who might have already learned to read in Spanish to be able to read Cofan, or they could learn to read in Cofan and would be able to switch over to Spanish fairly easily. It took about 25 years to complete the New Testament, and then another 10 years to do the 25% of the Old Testament. Growing up here in the jungle was just an awesome place to grow up, but I always felt like God was leading me to come back and work here in the jungle with the Cofans. I went up to the States and worked for a while, went to Bible school, and met Esther, who became my wife. Pretty much told her right off the bat, you know, I'm heading back to Ecuador somehow or another. And so we came back here in 1990. Our main focus was going to be on the youth and giving them an alternative from the drinking parties and things like that. We built a youth center, and whenever I heard that there was going to be a party going on in the village, I would go, hey, come down here, we're going to have an overnight thing, stuff like that. So we spent about 11 years here living in the community with the Cofans. Moved up to Quito. We were able to buy a piece of property up there that had been used for a retreat center before. Twice a month I would try to get down here every other week, visiting 3 different communities in this area, Sinangue, Duvono, and Drano. I have the ministry up in Quito, which is working with youth, both from our church there and also a homeschool group, which we do out of our home. We've got about 40 to 50 kids that are showing up every other week. We continue to work with the ministry down here, working with kids, just encouraging the church leaders, giving them help wherever they needed it. I had a pastor friend, Cofan, and he had gotten most of his training in a Spanish seminary. He came back and he was all on fire. He preached in Spanish really good, and so he would be up there preaching in Spanish, and I said, no, you need to preach in your own language. And he goes, no, they understand, everybody knows Spanish. And I said, no, you need to do it in your own language, because people will understand it better if it's in their own language. And so one day he decided he'd try it. Morning service, he preached in Spanish. Evening service, he did the exact same sermon, but in Cofan. And everybody came up to him afterwards, the service, and oh, that was so awesome. We could actually understand it. And he goes, oh, I guess you're right. It is important to have it in their own native language, because, yeah, they're learning Spanish, but it's always best to hear something in your heart language. We did a bilingual New Testament just recently, which has Spanish on one side and Cofan on the other side, where they could compare back and forth, which has been a great tool, you know, because some people can, you know, then they can see it in both languages and get a little bit better understanding of it. Right now we're working on Old Testament translation. We've got 5 translators who are Cofan people who are working on the translation, and they each have a book that they're working on, and they work on translating the parts that have not been translated yet. So with the translation project that we've got going, the translators are taking a lot of their time, and thus they're not being able to work other jobs to raise money for their families. And so we are giving them a gift each month for the work that they've been doing. A lot of funding that's going to be needed for that as we get year after year of working on this. You know, we've had probably already this year a couple of baptisms, and so that's very cool, just seeing people coming to the Lord. And just Satan doesn't want this project to go forward, and he's going to do everything he can. And so just praying for the health of the translation team as they work on this.
Ampi kui patsa kuna setapwe chuma ken setapwe. Keki nyotia findi cho tewe hema isuye isupa anke chuma tuyuma patianye. Nani kema fiti fasku aima chavasitsa chigan bebedafa. Zakamba ki tewe hema fetayusha. Nani pui ai puyaya fasa puyande se Puina se manda se aima ki chava, kense ingiha, fechiga a inde kveda dapa, ingichia kitsama afason de kveda fai. Tuya ke nason de kveda pangi, pui ande son de kama manda faya.